Hello and welcome to another edition of the Property Voice podcast. My name is Richard Brown, and as always, it's a pleasure to have you join me again on the show today. Now, after all the excitement of the birthday special episode that we had last week, we're going to return to consider a meaty topic in property again this week, and that is of recycling your cash. However, just before we plough into that subject, a quick update following last week's show. Firstly, a few of you were interested in the secret podcast concept that I mentioned, and if you drop me a line, you will have realised that there is more on offer than first appears, so well done for taking the initiative there. Action takers are rewarded, but that's all I'm going to say on that right now. But the big news since we last met was, and last time, was the news about my book, Property Investor Toolkit, and it's now officially an Amazon bestseller as both a paid book as well as being a free one, which is what I mentioned last time out. So this is brilliant news. And after my birthday gift offer last week, and thanks to a little bit of support from some very kind souls, it reached #1 status in both the Kindle and indeed the Amazon bookstore in the property and real estate sections. Sure, it's no Harry Potter or even a Rich Dad, Poor Dad, but it still feels really, really, really good, I can tell you. So thank you very much to everyone that bought a copy of the book, and don't forget those bonuses that are mentioned in it. Will you just drop me a line if you'll spot those pretty easily if you bought a copy of the book. So thanks again. But right now, enough of that, and let's get talking recycling, shall we? Insert the property chatter bumper here. So over the past few weeks, I've come across no less than 3 separate people who are asking about recycling their cash investment in property deals. So the big question is it possible or is it just a myth? Well, over the next couple of weeks, I shall hope to unpick the bare bones on the subject just a little bit. And those that ask this question tend to want to know whether they can recover all of their cash invested, which includes the deposit, but also fees, cost of works, and any other cash requirement in a property project. And that's by refinancing the property soon after purchase rather than selling it on to get the money back that way. It's also known as the Buy, Refurbish and Refinance strategy, or BRR for short. So that's the kind of strategy we're talking about here, just to put it in perspective. I will say this, it is something that I have and indeed continue to do as part of my own approach to property investment. However, it is A, not easy, and B, not always possible to recover all of the cash costs. However, a good chunk of them can often be recycled under the right circumstances. But let's start by positioning the first of the questions that I came across on the subject as follows. And I quote, I'm about to complete on my first buy-to-let property, which I have managed to purchase BMV, which stands for below market value. I will be looking to refinance after 6 months to release my deposit. My question is, should I try and add value to the property before refinancing, or as I have bought BMV, is that enough to pull out all of my deposit money after a refinance? Well, this question aims at getting a property revalued after a relatively short time period. Here it's 6 months, with a view to refinancing at that figure sufficient to pull out all, or if not a substantial part of the funds invested up to that point in time. Now let's start with this first question then this week, and let's consider a below market value purchase. And we'll talk about below market value a little bit as well, perhaps a little bit later. But it's a common view to try and get the property value uplifted quickly without doing any work, and indeed it's one likely to fail, I'm afraid to say. Valuers are appointed and are so answerable to the lender, whilst they will be asked to provide a current valuation of the property. If they're looking at one purchase recently, and when I say recently I mean usually within a year or so, then they will need a very good reason to value it above the original purchase price, regardless of what that was. So the best options really to achieve a higher valuation to release our deposit will be option 1, showing demonstrable improvement works that have enhanced the property's condition, value and saleability, and not just a lick of paint and a tidy up. Option 2, delaying the refinance to say 18 months or even 2 years downstream when the original purchase price will become less relevant. And of course, option 3, which is really what the question was directing towards, where there's an overwhelming reason to lift the property value up to what looks like the market norm. And this will need a very strong set of comparables that support the open market value figure that is being sought, and also a watertight reason why our purchase price has a genuine, or was a genuine, below market value opportunity, making it look like a complete outlier to the rest of the recent comparable sales. But I have to say, in the present climate, valuers seem to be extremely cautious or even downright negative, and so the likelihood of option 3 happening is very low, I would say. So that would leave really option 1, adding genuine value to the property, or option 2, delaying the refinancing date, as the most viable alternatives. Now, given that probably don't want to delay the refinancing date for perhaps 18 months to 2 years down the line, although that's a perfectly acceptable approach to take, it leaves option 1 really of trying to add value to the property as being the one that we'll focus in on a little bit here. So if we're trying to increase the value as per option 1, still don't be surprised if the valuer does not lift the value figure after such a short period of time. Unless, of course, the improvement works are beyond just a cosmetic facelift and do genuinely improve the underlying condition and value. And are also supported by a lot of comparable actual sales prices, evidence there's out there in the market to latch onto. And even then, the value may still not be lifted, so just prepare yourselves for that. But here are some of the top of mind really value-adding actions that you could probably utilize to maybe or probably sway a valuer to consider lifting a value upwards soon after the original purchase price at a BMV figure, as has been suggested here. But bear in mind, there's still no guarantees. So here are some of the top of mind issues. So first of all, we can, the old adage goes, kitchens and bathrooms sell houses. So if we remodel or replace these, the kitchen and bathroom that is, then indeed it can add value. Similarly, if we increase usable living space or floor space, we can do this by extending or converting to add space and value. But clearly both of these examples, in fact nearly all of these examples, are going to come at a cost is what I meant to say, sorry. So make sure you do your sums. We can upgrade and refurbish, and that can be things like replacing what I call the guts of the property, so that'd be plumbing, gas central heating, electrics and that kind of thing. Or it could be other aspects of the property, and getting it up to current standard. Could be things like windows and flooring and those sorts of things. And I've obviously mentioned the kitchens and bathroom, it kind of comes into that category as well. So yes, basically upgrading and refurbishing. Equally, we can remodel and reconfigure. This is an interesting one because we can make use of the existing shell and floor plan. So for example, we can add a bedroom or an ensuite bathroom. We could relocate the bathroom. Often you find that in Victorian properties the bathroom is effectively outside, but downstairs at least, and you can perhaps relocate it to the first floor. You can convert a garage into living space. But bear in mind there could also be a trade-off here as well. So for example, if we were to lose a garage but gain a bedroom, they may cancel each other out, at least to some extent, in the mind at least of the valuer. So keep that in mind as well. We can fix some structural or other problem issues. So what I'm driving at here is fixing things like subsidence, Japanese knotweed, infestations, and that kind of thing. So fixing those sort of problems can often add value, and it could be a justification for why there was a BMV or below market value purchase in the first place, of course. And the other one that often gets overlooked really, but is legal gains. So we can apply some legal changes to add value, and by way of example, that could be to extend a lease. So if we've got a short lease, we can extend the lease and therefore uplift the value. We could either acquire or gain a share of the freehold, or indeed title split a property into smaller units such as flats and that kind of thing. They're the sort of legal gains I'm driving at. So they're all some of the examples, and this comes from a longer list that I often work with myself, but it's just to give you a bit of an insight really into the sorts of things that can be used to demonstrate adding value to a property in a fairly short period of time, and therefore generating an uplift in value. But as I mentioned earlier, that they can come as a cost, so it's all about doing our sums, of course. But if we do adopt the value-adding strategy that I'm talking about here, then and then refinancing later on in line with some of those suggestions, there's a couple of other points as well to consider and keep in mind, just to have it at. I'm just going to re-record this paragraph. I'm making the right balls of it. Sorry. So if we do adopt the value-adding method and refinancing later, as I'm kind of suggesting, then there's a few other suggestions and top-of-mind things that we might want to consider as well. And the first of those is a very simple one. We should take both before and after photographs, and that just gives a bit of an audit trail or evidence of the work we've done, really. We should make sure we get all our paperwork in order, and that's things like getting planning consents and building regulations approval, all guarantees for the work and that sort of thing, fence certificates for windows and electrical sign-off certificates for installations, that kind of thing. So get it all together. Of course, we should keep all the receipts. It sounds kind of obvious, but we should be able to evidence the work we've done, and indeed produce a schedule of works or something like that, which describes what we've done in each of the areas and provides a written record, if you like. And of course, if we're doing any of the work ourselves, we shouldn't forget really to value our own time. It's not just cost of materials. Time, is one of the most significant investments in any work in a property, whether we use an external party or we try and do it ourselves. So use a reasonable, trader day rate equivalent. If we've done a bit of plastering or painting and decorating, we should put a line item in our schedule of works that reflects the value of our time. And indeed, we should find some recent comparable sales figures, and these should be within the last 6 months and ideally within a quarter of a mile of the target property, so that we can support our business case, really, that we're going to justify to the valuer, and we should be presenting that evidence. If the valuer is going to find it themselves anyway, but it just helps them along the way. But keep in mind there could also be other property values which might work against us. So try and have a rationale really of why you think the property is valued, maybe at a slightly higher figure. It could be down to the condition of the property or the actual location, or having a south-facing garden, these sorts of things. So do that little bit of work as well. And finally, really, a little bit perhaps light-hearted, but as my business partner, who is a chartered building surveyor, always says, be nice to surveyors because they are people too. Yeah, indeed, they are. They're people too, so be nice, but keep it professional, but be nice. Now, personally, I have actually had a valuation lifted by over £50,000 on a property. I paid £142,000 for, and I got it lifted to £195,000, and that was based on a £4,000 light redecoration. But that was a little while ago now, and the valuation climate seems to be shifting again of late. So, for some unknown blooming reason, I'm not really sure why, but I think that's unusual, really, to get that kind of uplift in value. That was, I would call it a below market value purchase, as you can probably clearly see from the figures there. But and I didn't spend that much money on the project, but I did manage to get a rather nice uplift in value. So that was an example, perhaps supportive of the question and the questioner. But I have to say that it's rare, really, to get that kind of return from a property project. So you usually have to spend a bit more money and demonstrate an increase in value beyond that. However, I do consistently take on value-adding projects where the after improvement works value is sufficient to release a significant part of my starting cash investment. Obviously, in that case, the one I've just mentioned, it was clearly all of it. But often it's the reality is that often leave some money in the project, even if I'm adopting one of those value-adding strategies that I've outlined here above. I usually work on a general principle of leaving something like 10 to 20% of my initial cash investment in a deal. And usually I'm using financing, so my cash investment is not the full purchase price. I would hasten to add. And it can sometimes be better, and it can sometimes be a little bit worse, but that largely depends on the lender and the valuer. It can also depend on the project, of course, and making sure that I've done all my due diligence and I've selected the right kind of project and kept a lid on all the costs and that kind of thing. And I should also clarify, as I kind of alluded to just now, that here I'm including all of my cash costs and fees. It's not just the deposit on the purchase price. It's all of the fees involved here. So a lot of people ignore that point, but when I do my calculations, I'm taking account of all of my cash costs. So and equally, I do tend to use some kind of financing in my own personal projects, and this does bring a hefty cost of financing into the equation, I have to say, and that's probably the element that often gets left in. It's the financing related costs that often get left in the deal. So I guess if you're paying cash, and I have also paid cash, it's more likely to actually see the full recycling of the cash investment than if you're using financing. But there's a number of good reasons to use financing, not least of which you don't need as much cash, and of course it's a form of leverage, and we've spoken about that before as well. But so on a cash purchase, yes, I think it's quite conceivable to recycle all of the cash invested if we follow these sorts of principles that I'm talking about, and even with financing, a very large proportion of it is the case as well. So the conclusion is, yes, it's perfectly possible to fully recycle your cash when undertaking property projects. However, there is a very large dollop of conditions attached to this statement, I can tell you. Yes, it depends. It always depends, doesn't it? Well, it depends on the nature of the project. I've kind of alluded to, picking the right kind of project, the right kind of area, and knowing your numbers before and after, and the cost of works and that kind of thing. Whether you've got a cost of financing to cover can be part of the rationale here. The lender's policy and the criteria. I mean, they may not let you do it. They may want you to leave, as they would call it, some skin in the game. So they just may not allow it. So talk to your broker and find out what the lender's policy and criteria are. Of course, it's going to depend on how much you pay for the property, and indeed the cost of the works undertaken, and of course having the right kind of genuine end valuation post works as well. Equally, it's going to be how effective you are at managing the project and containing time and cost overruns as well. That's another big part of the equation that comes into play. And of course, whether you want to recover all of your cash costs or just the purchase price or the deposit, say. The original question just talked about the deposit. I suspect in reality the person asking that question would have been looking to recover all of their cash costs. So I normally answer it in terms of recovering all of the cash costs. But if you're prepared to leave some of your fees or cost of finance left in the deal, left invested in the deal, and have a return on cash investment, that's how I look at things, then it's very, very possible to perhaps recover some or all of that throughout the project. And of course, crucially, it depends on the valuer and the valuation they arrive at as well. And this can indeed be very ambiguous and uncertain part of the plan, certainly these days at least, from what I've been seeing and hearing about. That's for sure. So genuinely, it's not a myth. Yes, it's possible to fully recycle your cash on a property project, but don't just expect to buy a property at what appears to be a crazily low, below market value price and simply get it revalued after 6 months. There's a lot more to it than that, and in fact that, as I mentioned earlier, is probably not going to work. So you're going to have to get some sort of justification for uplifting the value. That's often going to be added value improvement works. It's going to come at a cost. It's going to involve different types of risk and project management and other costs and financing and this kind of thing involved. So, and as to the point about below market value, you've noticed that I haven't really touched on it too much. I've kind of left it as a given, really, but that's a whole other topic. I can tell you what actually is below market value. We're just going to leave it there for now. We're just going to focus on the whole recycling point. But I think you can clearly see that it is possible from my own experience, and selecting the right kind of project, but making sure it's an added value type of project, not just buying it cheap and then expecting to refinance in 6 months, because certainly in the current climate, neither lender nor value is probably going to support your argument in that case. So there you go. That's it's not a myth. It's entirely possible, and I hope you found the topic interesting. The show notes can be found over at the website, thepropertyvoice.net, and by all means, feel free to drop me a line, podcast@thepropertyvoice.net, if you want to discuss this subject a little bit further, and I can tell you about some of my own experience, perhaps in a bit of an exchange of emails if you'd like to. But next time I'm going to be carrying on the theme really and talking about recycling a deposit and other cash inputs by using a different method of valuation, So this is, it can be combined with doing added value works, but it's really converting a property from one valuation method to an alternative one. So I'll leave it there for now, and perhaps you'd like to join me next time as we have that kind of discussion, and I'm sure you're going to find that interesting as well. But right now, I just want to say thanks very much for joining me once again on the show today, and until next time on the Property Voice podcast, it's ciao ciao.